I get impressed, inspired, fascinated by the things that, when I read about the saints and the things that they go through to practice their faith, to practice their religion. This last week, the church celebrated the memorial of Saint Kateri Tekakwitha, who was the first Native American canonized as a saint in the church. She was the child of an Algonquin Christian mother, and she had an arranged marriage to a Mohawk chieftain who was a pagan. Her mother and her father and her brother all died in the smallpox pandemic or epidemic. And she too was affected by that. So she was 4 years old when her parents and her brother died. And smallpox impaired her vision, so it was hard for her to see. And they ended up naming her Tekakwitha, which means she who bumps into things. So that was because of her sight and because she would bump into things. That's what they named her. And so she went to live after her parents and brother died with her uncle, who was a Mohawk. And this uncle had Jesuit missionaries as guests in Christianity, and she took the name Kateri, which is Mohawk for Catherine of Siena, when she was baptized at 20 years old. And after her baptism, so she would practice her religion, but the Mohawks were vehemently opposed to her conversion, and they would mock her religious practices, the rosary. They would insult her, vicious abuse. She refused to work on Sunday, and so they called her lazy, and they withheld food from her. And when she would go to church, they would throw rocks at her. And she lived this way for a year, and then was encouraged to flee to the local Jesuit mission in Montreal, where she could practice her religion freely, and which she did. And she grew in prayer and charitable works. This all happened in the late 1600s. But what's fascinating and inspiring is what she went through, and how did she do this? Where did she get the strength to live like she did? No one else around her, I should say, no one, not her family, and even the other Mohawks were against her. Well, she found and kept focus on the one thing necessary, the one thing needed that Jesus speaks about. In the gospel, Jesus isn't saying to Martha that hospitality, or hard work for that matter, is her problem. But she's worried and anxious about many things. The first reading from the book of Genesis, juxtaposed to the gospel, it shows us that hospitality and hard work isn't the problem. Abraham is held up as an example. But he has this theophany. It's an encounter with God, and he knows it. He recognizes it because he goes and he bows down to them. And there's an implication here, too, of the triune God. These three men, this encounter that God has, or that Abraham has with God in the form of these three men. It's an implication or an indication of the Trinitarian God, which doesn't become clear until the New Testament. But so he has this vision, and it says, when he ran from the entrance to the tent to greet them, and bowing to the ground, he said, "Sir, if I may ask." So there's the sign of the Trinity. He goes to these three men and he says, "Sir," in the singular. So he knows this is God, and he focuses all his energy on giving hospitality to God. Nothing and no one else matters, and he doesn't have many things he's anxious about. He's only concerned about serving and giving hospitality to God. And so Abraham is held up in this way. So the one thing that Jesus lovingly invites Mary to is to focus on him as the one thing necessary. And all those other things, our hard work and all those every other areas, those things that we're concerned of, will fall into place. It's like when we make priorities. We make priorities because we know that those are the most important things, and everything else will follow. It's not that we don't make effort in those other areas. So it's making God the top priority in one's life, not just another thing among many things that I might have as part of my life. When we think of Sunday Mass or Saturday evening, Sunday and Mass on Sunday is like the thing as a community and as individuals that is the one thing necessary in our lives on a regular basis, on a weekly basis. Sunday is at the center of our week, the end of one week and the beginning of another, smack dab in the middle. When we go to Mass on Sunday, that central salvific mystery of our faith, not only keeping the Sabbath rest, resting from our normal day-to-day activities and work and labors, if we can, spending time with family and friends and recreating, but sitting at the feet of Jesus, if you will, at the place where Jesus speaks to us as a community and individually. And we participate and receive Jesus' rescue of ourselves and of the world from eternal death. If we miss this Mass through our own fault of prioritizing something else, then we start down the road of everything getting out of priority. All of a sudden, now we have multiple things we can worry about. And it's hard to see. We start to find it difficult to have things in priority and in right order. And we become like Martha, worried and anxious about many things. We're not going to Mass. What comes first if we're not putting God first? Then we start questioning what does come first? What are first things? And lose sight of those most important things in life. And we lose ground on keeping focus on the one thing. And that's why missing Mass willfully puts us out of communion with the Lord. It's a serious break with communion with God and with the community. And we need the sacrament of reconciliation first before we can go back to communion. But you're focusing. And coming here today, you are focusing, or if you go to someplace else for Mass, up north, on the one thing needed, putting the Lord first by going to Mass. And actually, it's also a matter of justice. Last week we talked about the Good Samaritan and loving our neighbor. Well, how is it that we love God and put God first? It's a matter of justice, because what is due our neighbor is to love them and to serve them when they're in need. What is due to God is to worship Him, especially at least once a week on Sunday. Yes, we try to have a prayer life each day individually and with our families, and to live out our faith on a day-to-day basis. But this comes first. And don't worry about those whom you worry about, because maybe they've left the church or maybe they've stopped going to Mass. I've heard a lot of those over the last 15 years or so that have left because of the clergy scandal, and particularly because of the way the bishops have acted on it or not acted on it. And I understand that, but I also know that those of you who are coming don't come because of what any bishop or priest has done. You come because you want to put Jesus Christ first in your life and keep your focus on him. And some haven't come back to Mass after COVID for whatever reason, but don't worry about them. Martha came around. In fact, she came around to have a very profound profession of faith in Jesus, an understanding of him. When Lazarus, for example, while Martha was a saint, she's named a saint, but when Lazarus died and Jesus came and he said to her, "Do you believe in the resurrection of the body?" And she said, "Yes, I do, Lord." "And do you believe I can raise Lazarus from the dead?" "I do. I have come to believe that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God." So continue to put Christ and to come to Mass. You may not be pelted by rocks like St. Catherine was, or ridiculed. Well, maybe you will be. Maybe you have been ridiculed by coming to Mass. Maybe when you're with family in another setting and you have to break away, nobody else is going to Mass, and you might get teased for that. Or even worse than teased. There's more subtle pressures too. I was just up in Eveleth this last week, and they had, on the 4th of July, they had a parade, and they had the clown band, which is kind of fun. But right in the middle of the clown band was a guy dressed up like a bishop. Message: bishops are clowns. Okay? And imagine how I thought as a priest standing there. But that's a subtle pressure of Catholicism. Look at these clown bishops or clown priests or whatever it might be. How could you go to Mass, when there's a child abuser up there, You might hear those kind of things, and that's pressure. Okay, stop rambling here. I'll skip that example. But there's also just indifference. Just indifference to what it means to love God above all and give him his due. And that can wear on us. That can wear us down and cause us to get casual about Mass and worship at Mass. When the American Catholic Indians heard of Kateri's life, there was a revival among them. So that's the way it usually happens when you find out about somebody's life. Most people find out about other people's lives after they die. But there was this revival when they saw how faithful she was. And so the more that you grow in orbiting your life around God, the better it is for those who have lost that focus or lost that priority in their lives. Your loved ones may not come back to the faith of their youth until after you pass on to your eternal rest. But pray and trust that the Lord will bring them back. Just keep focusing on the one thing necessary.